Welcome back to College Football Addiction. Is the Big 12 in trouble? Was this a good year? Was this a bad year? What's the outlook for 2025? We're going to talk about all those things with Drake C. Toll. Locked on Big 12. How you doing, bud?
I'm doing great, TJ. People don't want to hear it. The chaos, the parody of the Big 12. I didn't want to hear it 5 weeks ago, but truly it is the most chaotic conference in college football, and I'm not sure if that's a good thing.
Yeah, so I think you can optimist, pessimist look at this, glass half full, glass half empty. Obviously, from a money perspective, if BYU could have won out and Colorado could have figured out a way to get into the Big 12 championship and you could have maybe found two teams in there, that would have been phenomenal, right, for the conference from a money perspective. Let's go glass half full first, right? We'll be a little positive. Was the chaos, though, and the attention that Colorado brought, that BYU brought, that Kenny Dillingham has brought, some of the big teams falling, Utah, Kansas State, people's preseason predictions for the top, was all of that chaos and drama maybe worth it from a brand perspective, even though maybe you sacrificed the money of a second team?
Absolutely not. Because the people who put the money into this sport are not talking about the Big 12 right now. They're talking about every way to avoid having the Big 12 involved in this college football playoff. They're just, that one Big 12 team's going to get in automatically, but we're going to focus on the real competitors here, from Oregon to even still Ohio State or Alabama, who is displayed at 9-3, that they need a spot here. And there are two schools of thought here. The first being, if you're the Big 12 and you have three schools that have 11 wins right now, they really can't deny you from that standpoint having multiple teams in the college football playoff. But when you're the Big 12 and your teams are 10-2, you've now seen at the national level, you will be kept out compared to a 9-3 SEC team, even if BYU has a strength of schedule 40 points higher than Alabama, even if those SEC schools only play 8 games. At this point, the parity of the Big 12, when you kind of eat each other alive, it's not that different from the SEC. Ole Miss losing to Kentucky or Florida and Alabama losing to Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. It happens across every conference in this country. Ohio State losing to Michigan. The reason the Big 12 has that spotlight put on them is because every loss just means more to the playoff committee and to the national media. The narrative is the Big 12 is going to eat itself to the point where it doesn't get anybody in and it's non-competitive. And as long as that's the narrative and the people that control that narrative are controlling who gets into the college football playoff, the Big 12 is in a tough spot. And that tough spot comes from that chaos word.
Is it almost better to just have a super dominant team like we maybe thought BYU was going to be and hope that somebody upsets that? Like that, is that the only path going forward for Arizona? I'm sorry, not Arizona, for the Big 12 to get into the playoff? Here's a second team into the playoff.
Here's what's tough is there was a point where Colorado could have been 10-2. We could have seen Colorado at 10-2. We could have seen BYU at 12-0 and Iowa State at, say, 11-1 or even 12-0 themselves. And when that scenario plays out, or say that, here's this, TJ, if Colorado had not played Nebraska and they'd instead gone the SEC route and played Mercer that week, all right, and you get that extra win, we'll say Colorado in this scenario beats Kansas too. They're 11-1. Iowa State's 12-0. BYU's 12-0. You're not leaving Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter out at 11-1. You're not. You're not leaving 12-1 loser of the Big 12 championship game. You can't over a 9-3 SEC. That's a 3-win gap. While they would want to, that's a scenario in which the Big 12 gets 3 in because they have those wins. And we have learned recently, your strength of schedule really doesn't matter. What you've done for me lately doesn't matter all that much. And honestly, your conference to an extent doesn't have to matter if you have the brand. They just want that brand. If we put little check marks or question marks inside of a box and listed your resume on it and then picked those blindly, the Big 12's got a fighter's chance. BYU has a great resume. So does Arizona State and Iowa State. But we don't do that. We have that box labeled Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, and that's where this is going to lean. So the best case scenario for the Big 12 is win as many games as you can. But having that one dominant team, like had it been a 12-0 BYU who loses to a 10-2 Colorado, at that point, you do get 2 in.
Who are the teams from a brand perspective? I would imagine Colorado's up there. Is Arizona State in there? Who are the teams that can help that brand? Because the ACC is similar, but they do have the brands, and I know we weren't good this year, but of Florida State, Clemson, Miami. There are some big brands there that kind of help carry things where you know that if Clemson goes 10-2, they're in. You know that if Miami goes, Miami go 10-2 this year, they didn't get in. But yeah, you get the idea, right? Like, who are the brands that could maybe help elevate that to say like these? Because you're right about like the whole cannibalizing itself.
Yeah.
Is there anybody that you could see in 3 years from now, and who knows what football looks like in 3 years from now, but like you could say like this team had the staying power to kind of be, I know that maybe the Big 12 doesn't even want this, but the new Texas and Oklahoma.
Right. There is no one yet that is elite in this conference. There's no one who's won a national championship recently, no one who's gone to the college football playoff and made substantial noise outside of TCU, and people feel like that was a one-off because they were bad the next season. TJ, there are 2 points that I want to make here. The first being BYU and Colorado have set themselves up to be national players. Reason being, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, one of the fastest growing faiths in the entire world. You're the flagship university of an entire faith. That's going to put you in a good spot from a branding perspective, even a money, NIL perspective. The donorship that comes into BYU is going to help them. Vast fan base across this country. The other thing, Colorado with Deion Sanders, they were the most watched team in the Big 12 this season, and it wasn't even close, racking up millions and millions of views, being Fox's big noon game no matter what, because they had that kind of brand. So those are the 2 that off the riff have kind of that marketing value, and they were good this year. You saw that. Brett Yormark saw that. But then the other school of thought is anybody can become Clemson. I've mentioned this ad nauseum last offseason, and I'm coming back on this narrative. 15 years ago, Clemson was in a similar spot from a revenue standpoint as Bowling Green in football, and that is not very good, TJ. And the reason being, Clemson was terrible. Nobody cared about Clemson. Miami was the cream of the crop, or Florida State was the cream of the crop. And what did Clemson do? They spent 15 years winning, going to the playoff, winning national championships. Clemson is just what Kansas State could be. Clemson is what Iowa State or a Baylor or a TCU using the DFW Metro or UCF using recruiting in Orlando. Anybody can create a Clemson. Example being 15 years ago, Clemson didn't exist. So BYU, Colorado, they're the closest right now, but anybody can build a brand in the Big 12 if you do one thing, and that's win for the next decade.
Yeah, I like the UCF call. I think that the money that they could potentially tap into with a massive just alumni base and that is just getting bigger and bigger. Again, I'm very partial to Kenny because he was in Tallahassee, but I think a lifer coach could help you too, right? Yeah. Dabo stayed at Kentucky a long
you
time.
Say that, Mike Gundy. Let's point at Mike Gundy.
That's true. That's true. Well, it could work, right? Like I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but I don't. I mean.
Well, TJ, and even Bill Snyder.
Right, I don't know if Kenny takes much else,
Bill Snyder was, and maybe Kenny is the lifer coach, but if he becomes a Gundy or even becomes Bill Snyder, who again put Kansas State on the map, they were below 500 all time before he got there and transformed them into a football program. But today, what does the brand Kansas State mean? Nationally, not that much. Even the lifer coach couldn't save that.
Yeah, that's a good point. What's the outlook? Just really big picture, 30,000 foot. We're not even to Jerry's World yet, but what's the outlook next year for the Big 12?
You got to get your ducks in a row somewhere here. I think Brett Yormark's barking up some of the wrong trees from a branding standpoint. He brought the WWE in last year. I think it was like Brock Lesnar brought out the championship trophy, and he had Nelly perform at halftime. This year, Neo is performing at halftime. And like, guys, when you force it too much, you're only digging the ditch. Put the shovel down. We don't need Neo. And nobody's seeing that and going, dang, the Big 12 has really put it together here. So from a branding standpoint, the Big 12's got to get with the times a little bit more. And then you got to have one team that goes 11-1 or 12. TJ, that's it. That's the thesis. One of your teams has to go 11-1 or 12-0 next season. If you keep saying, oh, well, it's fun, our conference is fun, it's good football to watch, that I agree. And I'm a maniac. I love that kind of thing. But the general viewer, the general household would much rather see Ohio State play Georgia than they would see 12-0 BYU play 11-1 Kansas State. And that's not going to change unless Kansas State and BYU are in that double-digit win range every year.
Yeah. Drake, I appreciate your insight, man. I love talking with you about the Big 12, which, again, chaotic, but one of the more entertaining conferences if we're keeping it a buck this year. And I do think will be in the future. Is that a great thing for the conference? Is that not? Certainly we'll talk about that 100 times between now and this point next year. But where can people follow you for daily Big 12 content?
Yeah, at LO Big 12 or at Drake C. Toll on Twitter, and wherever you find your podcasts at Locked On Big 12.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah.